and Tom's Market, right up the street. I worked there, you know, stocking the shelves and bagging groceries, and Stan Larisky delivered the groceries to Tom's Market, 1 truck a week every Thursday, and he was on the fire department, and he was a truck driver, so, man, to a 13-year-old kid, Stan Larisky was like a god. The fire department's kind of like a little island in this busy little metropolis that has changed at a much slower rate than our surrounding area. And it's something for me, when I come to the fire station and when I get with all the guys and gals here at the fire department, it's like stepping a little bit back in time. And it's quite calming, really, to know that this place it's been here for an awful long time, and it's continuing, you know, we're continuing a really good tradition. And for me, we're continuing a part of the small town that I really enjoyed growing up in.
That tradition began just after the first settlers of Aspen came over Independence Pass in 1881. Aspen quickly grew to a town of about 30,000 people, made up mostly of silver miners and ranchers. The downtown was lined with hotels, bars, bordellos, and an opera house. You had to be pretty tough just to get to Aspen in those days, and the people who volunteered to be firefighters ran hose cart races against each other and hoisted beers and whiskey at the annual Firemen's Ball. Hi, I'm Jimmy Ibbotson. In the late 1800s, there were 5 separate fire departments in Aspen. They were called hose companies. And when a fire broke out along a boundary line, sometimes a fight would break out too, over who'd get to put it out. There's always been a tradition of pride among Aspen volunteer firefighters. While the stories those men told about hightailing it to the station and putting out fires are lost in time, there are some things about being a volunteer firefighter that never change.
One of the excitement of when the siren goes off, before we even had pagers and the siren would go off, it's so loud, it just adds chaos immediately to it, and your heart is pounding.
Extrication call or flames showing, that kicks the adrenaline in pretty quick, and you try and get there, you try and get your gear on as fast as you can. He who gets there and gets dressed up and is ready to go play gets to dance. Every time that pager goes off at 2 o'clock in the morning, I guarantee I come out of bed, my whole body, horizontally at once.
When the fire whistle goes off and you arrive at the fire station and jump in a truck and you look at your buddies that know what they're doing and where they're going, there's just nothing better in the world that you can go and intercede for somebody in trouble.
After the mining boom busted in 1893, Aspen began moving into a period known as the Quiet Years, extending throughout the first half of the 20th century. But the old buildings, cabins, and shacks in town were made of wood, and there were plenty of fires, including one that burned down a whole block on East Hyman on November 5th, 1941.
And the fire, I guess, started in the Silver Grill, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The bar and that someplace.
Yeah,
the guys said, Ben, you could hear the old beer kegs popping in the basement and what have you. And then it just spread because that section of the block was all wood.
Yeah, there wasn't any stopping to that because after all, Huey McCabe and all of those people were in there too, and it just tore everything apart.
The fire burned out the town's electric system, and the alarm couldn't sound. So Tom Sardi drove an ambulance up and down the streets blowing the siren. Lawrence Alicia shot off his gun in the streets, which was a common signal in those days. Although Aspen remained a quiet, small town in the 1950s and 60s, the quiet years officially ended in 1947, when former members of the 10th Mountain Division, who had trained in the Rockies before WW2, teamed up with Chicago businessman Walter Pepke to dedicate Lift 1 on Aspen Mountain. In 1949, Pepke organized a celebration of the 200th birthday of German poet and philosopher Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, attracting luminaries such as Albert Schweitzer and Thornton Wilder. A year later, Pepke founded the Aspen Institute, and Aspen's reputation as a place to spend a skiing vacation and to exercise the mind and spirit at the same time was just beginning. In the first half of the 20th century, the fire department was a city department and was only allowed to put out fires within the city limits. And it sure didn't have much in the way of equipment. So in October of 1953, the Aspen Fire Protection District was formed by a vote of 109 to 5, and the new district raised $30,000 to buy a brand new fire truck.
When we got the FWD, we thought we was in hog heaven because that'll go anywhere and pump a lot of water and
what does FWD stand for?
Four-wheel drive.
Four-wheel drive.
It was the name of the company. That's what they call their company. But it made all the difference in the world when we got that, because we could go just about anywhere with it. But it did have old slick military tires, so it was really tough, boy, on ice. We kept it chained up all winter just to make sure we got places.
Through the 1950s and 60s, the fire department was made up of city workers from the Streets and Parks Department and the county shop. They were mechanics and miners and truckers and guys working on the ski lifts. These were people with dirt under their fingernails and nicknames like Buckshot Parsons, Puppy Smith, Spot Smith, Stogie Madelone, Jinx Caparrella, and Hoss Rakestraw. It was like an extended family, and the fire station was everybody's second home.
If you were a tacker, if you were a Lauterback, if you were a Smith, if you were a Herwick, if you were a Whitmire, these were all people that at any time, they were there. You couldn't do anything without somebody seeing you. You know, it was a small town, it was basically little lots, and you know, that's the way it was. It was a cool thing. It was the finest way to grow up.
Pretty laid back. There wasn't any development at all. We still had a lot of dirt streets. Barnard and Dr. Barnard and Baxter was still they were still racing cars downtown, and the development basically hadn't started then a whole lot. So it was pretty laid back. But in the 60s, so maybe even into some of the 80s, we had a lot of fires because there was a lot of sheds and shacks and shanties in town. We had a lot of fires. Of course, we didn't have the pagers and the fire siren to go off, so we'd get to the fire barn. There was a red phone on the wall, and you'd pick that up. It was a direct line to the sheriff's department, and then you'd jump in, and while you're taking that, one of the guys would be opening up a door. Somebody get in and drive, an engineer, and everybody pile on and go.
We would head to the fire, and the first thing that Stanley would do is grab the end of the nozzle and go charging into that building. And he would have a T-shirt on if he was lucky, and a pair of pants. And the next thing you know, somebody'd be coming out, "Hey, Stan needs a helmet." "Okay, Chief." So he'd take my helmet and take it in there to wear it instead of getting bounced around.
So their gear at the time was just whatever they had on.
We didn't have gear, really.
Suit, white shirts,
we didn't have gear
shoes, run out of the Eagles Club during the dance and fight fire.
Back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, most of the volunteer firefighters lived or worked within a mile of the firehouse, and they became very good at the fast attack. You know, get to the scene quickly, knock in the door and some windows, and put the wet stuff on the red stuff. Jesse Caparrella was at the Conoco, Buck Parsons was at the Aspen Drug, and Cliff Little was at Little Cliff's Bakery. This was a town where a man named Guido Meyer could buy a partially burned house from someone named the Whispering Swede and then give the fire department a case of beer in exchange for burning the rest of it down.
It's like this 4th of July weekend. We always had the fireworks, and we had to collect funds, you know, to put on the fireworks show. So one of our things was on the 3rd of July, the night of the 3rd, we would set off one of those 9-inch salutes right here at the fire station, straight up. Shake up the town. In the meantime, we had somebody up here on Red Mountain build a big bonfire. So everybody would rush out of the restaurants and the motels, and they'd see that big fire, and they'd all jump in their cars, and they'd all go up there to the fire. So while after everybody got up there, then we closed the highway down here at the old hospital and went out there with our helmets and collected, stopped every car, said, you don't get out here, you know, you chip in. We paid for our fireworks that way.
And that's how you paid for your fireworks?
That was a dead end drill.
We didn't get all of it, but we got a good share of it there. On boots and helmets worked out very good up there on a deal like that.
That is hilarious.
The Aspen Volunteer Fire Department has been setting off 4th of July fireworks for as long as anyone can remember, and they began a January tradition of winter fireworks at the first Winter Skull Festival in 1951.
And in the winter for Winter Skull, that was always fun because I won't tell, we had bottles of clear liquid stuff up there, antifreeze. And then after it was all done, we got it loaded on the snowcat. Some of us had shovels with runners on them. And down the hill we go. And as more and more condos got at the base, it gave us more and more options for swimming pools. And we'd go partake of the swimming pools. Gosh. And I'm glad nobody ever called us in for indecent exposure.
In the late 1960s and early 70s, Aspen started to change. 90 years after the miners came to Aspen in search of the rich lode of silver, the hippie counterculture came to this remote and beautiful town in search of a place where they could be free to practice their chosen way of life. Hunter S. Thompson and his Gonzo campaign for Pitkin County Sheriff in 1970 served as a beacon, and before long the movie stars and musicians were coming too.
Well, during the hippie invasion in 1969, we had a lot of fires, you know, and they'd go out and set one outside, and then when the truck got out of town, they'd come in and set one in town. We were just wild trying to keep up with all the fires, so that's when we had to keep 6 men in town, let the rest of them go out there.
And why were the hippies responsible?
Well, responsible? They weren't responsible.
That was the reason. That was the main reason.
They just set fires for fun to see the trucks go, you know.
What happened between the hippies and the fire department, though?
Well, the main thing that started was they were harping at the fire department because they couldn't put it out. You know, they said, oh, that damned old fine outfit, you couldn't put out a match, even blowing it out. So, yeah. Anyway, the first thing, one of those 1.5 inch lines happened to come by out across the side.
Accidentally.
What was it you said? And they got about half of them off of the porch, and that's when the battle started.
I tried to get on the fire department when I first came here. This is sometime in the late 60s, early 70s. And they wouldn't let you on. I mean, I was like a hippie to them, and you couldn't even get an application.
You weren't a Clapper, a Caparrella,
Smith, a Tacker, a Vaughn, a Madelone.
Smith.
Strong. You left out the Strong.
Strong. You weren't a Zeke Newberry or any of that stuff.
That's right.
And they would not even give me an application.
The fire department actually changed at that time. I mean, it was a big deal. And there was guys that like wouldn't talk to you, and there was guys that, you know, and guys that actually quit after that or threatened to quit because these guys were on the fire department. It was like, who is he? Where did he come from? Why is he here?
Well, the closest was Jay Parker at the time.
He's gonna drink
All right,
our.
Let's get on. Tim, what about you?
This guy's gonna drink our beer.
I came up from I'd gone to school in college in California, and came up to play rugby. And then when you mentioned being related, I did remember that very distinctly. That first year, I said something about somebody, and I was taken aside and told, well, by the way, that's the wife of the cousin of the son of somebody. And when we finished, I think 20 of the 30 members were related at that time frame.
And while the makeup of the department began to change, the new firefighters loved the adrenaline rush of the fast attack, just like the old-timers did. The Hopkins Street Station was still a siren call to action and adventure.
Well, hey, it's not rocket science. It's like I was about 18 or 19 years old. You get to drive really big trucks, really fast. You don't have to pay any attention to the cops. You can pretty much do anything you want. You know, chicks dig it.
Boy, that siren would go off, and I'd have my face pressed up against the glass going, oh, I could be driving one of those trucks. And I'd wait and see these guys come running around the corner, emptying the Eagles and the Elks clubs. Yeah, God, I'd have been there.
Then, back then, you could ride on the beaver tail, the back of the truck, or the pumper, which was, back then, that was part of being a fireman, is to ride on the back of the pumper, see?
Maybe I wanted to drive the trucks, because I always drove. Nobody else drove. They were always upset because, oh, Cliff's always driving. He's always engineer. Well, I'm sorry, if you can get here quicker, then okay, you can take the truck.
And firefighters are nothing more than big kids with big toys.
Although a few outsiders managed to join up in the 1970s, the culture of the volunteer fire department didn't change much. The handful of families that ran the department was simply becoming an extended family.
So I was blessed that the people that I found myself surrounded with were part of the old Aspen, and I was a newcomer. They let us into their community, and it was the Elks Club, it was the Eagles, it was dead end drills, we had our fingers in every aspect of this community. So it was much more than just, you know, hot lights and fast women and running around in fire trucks. I mean, it was our social life. It was the real community. You knew and got to know the core, the engine room, the great unwashed in the steerage hold of Aspen.
Yeah, back then, you know, back then, you poet. Now,
and the barn was everybody's house, and everybody felt so comfortable there. And you know, I don't know. I have never been so accepted or felt so good about anything in my life when, you know, other than being with the department and being accepted by all these people. You know, all these older ladies, you know, that were much older than us, and all of a sudden they talked to us like we were real people, you know, because we were on the fire department. And it was like, wow, I've gotten over this threshold, this maturity, and it was kind of like the rites of passage into maturity was just the greatest feeling in the world.
But all around the Hopkins Street Fire Station, the town was changing. In 1970, the total property value of the fire district was $42 million. By 1980, it was $102 million. And Aspen had become the most recognized ski resort in the country. In the early 70s, the fire department raised money from turkey shoots and raffles for shotguns. But by the early 1980s, they were fundraising with 5K races. And the stories that were told at the fire barn, they were changing too.
Apparently this was an arson, and it started, but it started late, almost 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, when we rolled up, all these people that had finally gone to bed or whatever they were doing were jumping out the windows. I mean, it already self-ventilated itself through the roof, and these girls were jumping out bare-ass naked in fur coats. I was with Willie Wilson at the time. We're holy cow, look at that.
Talk about your changes.
Yeah, it was quite something else, yeah.
So if we were to go back in time to 1953 when there was a fire.
Geez, I don't know what they would be wearing then.
If they were wearing a fur coat, they probably killed it that morning.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing's for sure, you can't gather more than 2 volunteer firefighters together without hearing a good story.
This house is pretty much blazing, and we're looking for water, you know, and there's 3, 4 feet of snow up there, and so I go over to this one house and knock on the door. Nobody answers, and I grab the handle, and it opens up, and I go, hello? Nothing, and then I kind of peek my head around. I go, hello? And then I hear somebody in the back going, hello? So I kind of start walking towards this voice, and we'd do anything to get water, you know. So there's a swimming pool in this house. We were going to pump water out of this swimming pool to save the next house. So I kept going, hello, and I kept hearing hello, hello in the background. Go into where the pool is, and I go, hello, and I hear hello again. I turn around, and there's a parrot there, you know.
Hello, Parrot. Hey, want some water?
There you go.
I want a cracker.
We go, Well, the parent says it's okay. Well, we hooked the pump up to the swimming pool.
And the volunteers would never miss a chance to interact with the women of Aspen, both year-rounders and those just passing through.
In this case, they were hanging around in front of the station and coming up with some pretty silly things to do. They lined up the chairs across the front of the front of the barn, and every girl that would walk by, they'd made up scorecard numbers, and she'd walk by and they'd put up the number, and Crockett had the bullhorn, and he'd go, "Oh, we have an 8, a 7, a 7.5, a 9, and a 4. Oh, that Russian judge has been low all day."
This is the humor. Everybody is always coming up with stuff, and I don't know if it's to deflect the moment, you know, or the severity of the moment, but Jesse, we're fighting, and he goes, wait, and he turns and he looks at his butt and he goes, "Jack, does this bunker gear make my butt look fat?" And I just about spit through my mask, and I was dying. I said, "Jesse, we're fighting a fire." And I said, "Yes, it does."
Yes. The jokes and stories have always acted as a relief valve for a high-pressure and high-stakes job, but some of the stories are much more serious. They recount events that the storyteller will never forget.
That happened. See, that was one of my first fires, and I was in there, and I was on the first floor, the second floor, and I was doing what I shouldn't have been doing, fighting fire by myself. I had a hose, and you know, I was being a hero. When you were up somewhere and somebody else was somewhere else, and that was the time that I was in there and I saw the fire and I said, "I got it." And so I attacked it, was hammering away at this wall to get it into the base of the fire, I thought, and right next to me came a shower.
A shower.
And it was within inches of me. Had I been over a little farther, where I was earlier, I'd come back a little bit, it would have crushed me. So that was the first thing that happened. And then the second thing, I got out of there right away. I said, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" I got out of there and I found you, and I don't know who it was, but we went into a room and we were crawling along, and I don't know, you said, "Oh, get back." And so we went back and we had a flashover. I don't know if you remember that, but it came bowling right over the top of us. We were down on the ground, this thing went woo, right over the top. It's the first time I'd ever seen that.
I told those guys, I said, "Hey, you guys, we got this. You guys go out, send somebody else in, and I'll be here. I'll be fine till you guys get back." They got out, and all of a sudden it was like somebody grabbed me by the throat. There was no more air, there was nothing. And of course we had no lights, you couldn't see with the smoke. The only way I got out of there, and again we did have a little bit of training knowing to grab the hose, bring it up to my face and put it on fog. Got on my hands and knees and crawled out the back door using the fire hoses, a little bit of air, and it worked. Wow. That's probably the most scary one.
That's when we took our training real serious after that.
Can't you see all the problems development breeds? The news is appalling, your ethic is greed. Your lawyers are liars, their loopholes your stage. By the mid-1980s, the tourists and second homeowners had arrived in force. Fueled by a bullish stock market, downtown Aspen was filling up with new hotels and high-end shops. Cow pastures were turning into condos, and mountainsides were sprouting luxury mansions. From 1980 to 1990, the total property value of the fire district went from just under $102 million all the way up to $375.8 million. And the new houses weren't just slapped together with timber and plaster anymore.
I think what happened too, though, is the contents of rooms started changing. What the materials being used, more plastics, more synthetics.
Right.
And I think
poisonous
stuff. And the NFPA has said that rooms heat up faster now than ever before. They get to a higher temperature than ever before.
We were getting to the place where we were handling very expensive equipment. We were responding to very expensive property. We were trying to fight the battle with today's battle with yesterday's education.
The first rumblings of change came in 1978 when several candidates for Fire District Board called for better equipment and more training. Although those candidates lost the election, a new era was beginning to take hold. In 1985, Steve Crockett was elected fire chief, and he wasted no time shaking up the department. Crockett tripled the amount of required training per year and formed 20 new working committees and made attendance at meetings and training drills mandatory, with automatic suspensions imposed on any violations. Although former Chief Clapper and many of the fire captains and volunteers clearly understood the need for more training, Crockett was moving too fast. And when he suspended the legendary Stan Lariski and several others for missing a meeting, the wheels started falling off.
There was a tremendous amount of pride and satisfaction with the way they had conducted their affairs prior to this, and perhaps many of the people really didn't see the need to change as clearly as some of the others. And I think in any organization there's always going to be resistance to change. That's human nature. So part of it in how it was implemented, that caused a problem. You don't take a group of citizen firefighters who are there of their own free will, away from their families, away from their careers, and start hammering them and laying down the law.
Well, the morale problem had to do with the prior leadership, wanting to do too much too fast. And I think we went from an average of 17 firefighters per response down to 9. People became apathetic, didn't respond to fires anymore, they weren't having fun. So when I came in, we had a problem. And morale was the #1 thing to fix.
In October 1985, Chief Crockett resigned under pressure, and Peter Worth was elected chief. Over the next several years, the Aspen Volunteers became proud of something new.
Through all of our work and hard work and all the efforts, we were the first all-volunteer fire department in the state of Colorado to achieve State Firefighter 1 classification.
I mean, just recently we've had a couple of pretty large fires, and you can see the effects of the training and how the people roll. And
1987 was a watershed year. Many of the old-timers had retired, but the department didn't let them go unnoticed. For the first time in its history, the fire district held a ceremony in December 1987 for 3 firefighters with 20 years of service and presented them with custom-made silver belt buckles created by local silversmith Jim Hayes, who was also a volunteer firefighter. In December 1988, 13 more belt buckles were handed out. At the same time, the makeup of the volunteer department was changing with the times.
Well, I sort of think that at the time that I got on, which was 1987, there was, you know, being a hairstylist, and I had really long curly hair and a ponytail down to my back. I was from New York. I was born in Israel, and coming on the department, it was a really, I think it was a shock for everyone on the department. It was, you can imagine a bunch of guys that were born here having me sit down at the meeting looking the way I did. And of course, I thought I kind of broke the ice for the fire department at that time. It took me a while, and I think there was another guy, Larkin, who was Afro-American with dreadlocks. He was on the, he started the class with me too, one of the guys. And so the both of us coming on with a bunch of, I don't know if it's politically correct to say a bunch of nice redneck guys.
That's right.
But anyway, it took a while, but I endured it, and it was fun, and we all love each other now.
There was one particular guy on the department that wasn't crazy about us, and I remember Cliff and I think one of the other guys came up to me and said, if you have any problem with this guy, you let us know. They were very protective, which was cool. And but I remember doing a live burn where he was pinching my butt on the way in, but it really didn't bother me.
Because when you get with a group of people like that, you become a family. And families you joke around with. And when you have that many brothers or that many guys in a family, some of that stuff happens. And to me, I just have a great time with the whole thing. I don't have problems with, and there's been some pinching and stuff like that, and you kind of just take it with a grain of salt. If you don't like it, you tell them, you sock them in the arm and you say, don't do it again.
Although the department had gone through a series of dramatic changes, from how they trained to the equipment they used to the people who used it, what it meant to be a volunteer firefighter hadn't changed. When responding to a fire call, the adrenaline still pumped. They still raced each other to the fire trucks, and they still relied on each other completely in extremely high-pressure situations. That kind of pressure built strong new bonds among the young volunteers and the old-timers too, and the stories and jokes that grew out of those shared experience once again became the fiber that tied the department together.
15 years after he joined the department as a volunteer, Darrell Grove became the first paid chief in 1995. And not long after, a new annual award was established. The High Impact Award is handed out to volunteers who, well, do some kind of damage to the trucks or equipment. It's the kind of award that nobody wants to win. While the High Impact Award reflected a new era of professionalism, it also showed that the department hadn't lost its sense of humor.
The process of receiving a High Impact Award is, first of all, you have to damage a piece of fire department or fire district property. Once you do that and you get caught, the next step is that you have to wear the coat. The coat is, like I said, as ugly as there is as far as coats, that you have to wear this at the fire department meeting and to dinner afterwards. A trophy is made up from the parts or pieces that you destruct or damage.
Through the 1990s and up to today, the July 4th and Winter Skull fireworks in Aspen have grown much bigger and more grandiose, including much larger bombs. These days, they bring a backhoe up Aspen Mountain to dig a 50-yard trench where the mortar tubes are buried all in a row. As night falls, the firefighters, in full turnout gear, scramble back and forth for 20 minutes, lighting fuses and taking cover. The best part comes after the finale.
The best part was it was like being Mick Jagger at the end of a rock concert. Was every time we did the fireworks, standing up there, and after the finale, and it was really quiet, all of a sudden town would like start cheering and horns would blow, and you could hear it up on the hill, and it was the neatest feeling, like you're going,
a rock concert.
Yeah, like this, you know. It was like, it was cool.
In the mid-1990s, another stock market boom hit the city of Aspen. More houses appeared on the hillside. More fast cars zipped up and down the new 4-lane highway west of town. And more and bigger private jets landed at Aspen Airport. From 1990 to 2002, the total property value of the fire district jumped from $375 million to $1.3 billion. Over the years, volunteer firefighters have responded to more than a dozen small plane crashes in the thin mountain air from Lanedo to Independence Pass. In the fall of 2000, the fire department held a training drill for a major plane crash at the Aspen Airport. And just a few months later, in March of 2001, a Gulfstream jet carrying 18 passengers from Los Angeles crashed just short of the runway in a sudden snowstorm.
Aspen Fire, Aspen Ambulance, ours to the airport for a crash. We just witnessed a plane hit and crash, and it's on the highway. On the highway? It's right off of the highway, 82, heading towards that. Is it by Caparrella? I have no idea where we are. I don't know. Okay, thank you. Hello? There's been a plane crash from Trail Bluff. Okay, is it on the highway? I think so. We just came over our house, and then we heard it roar, and it just hit. Aspen Fire, Aspen Ambulance, ours to the east end of the runway for a jet that is reporting crash. We have no further information. Time is 19:04.
When I showed up, the fires were already out. The initial response was over, and the lights were on, and it was eerie. I mean, there were, you know, the images that I carry with me, without being too graphic, without revealing too much, without disrespect for the victims. There were mass casualties. And I was not one that walked up to the hill, and I did not go exploring. I never left the road, but I saw enough from the road to know what happened, you know. And I was up all night. You know, I called my mom early the next morning. You know, Mom, I saw dead people. You know, that was my first experience.
Your first time.
Now, since then, I've seen that, and it taught me a lot. I'm not haunted by it. You know, I wondered if I would be, if you know, if it was gonna stick with me. It's definitely stuck with me. Whenever I go by it, I think about it, and but you know, I didn't have to be there. I'm a volunteer. My pager goes off, I don't have to go. I went because that's what I chose to do.
We feel like ourselves or our family, if someone else is in that position, we'd want someone to take care of them. So that's a strong motivation. That's why, you know, when we get into some of those gory scenes, you can focus on the job that needs to be done and not be distracted by some of the unpleasantness of it, because somebody's got to do it, and boy, you'd hope that somebody would take care of you or your family if that happened to them.
Whenever firefighters or emergency responders encounter a grisly scene or a fatal crash, a debriefing system called Critical Incident Stress Management comes into play.
All the debriefings that I've done over the years, most often they start the same way. Everybody comes in and they're kind of jovial and talking and kind of cocky and going, yeah, there's no big deal. I don't know what we're doing here. And then as we start talking, things start happening and things start coming out, and images and sounds and you know, the whole picture becomes more impactful to them, and they realize that, yeah, they are carrying a little baggage.
The same financial forces that brought fast cars and faster jets to Aspen made it harder for year-round residents to afford the cost of living. And as more locals moved down valley to more affordable towns, the volunteer fire department started to worry about fielding a volunteer crew at a moment's notice. But with all the financial pressures of living in a resort town, the fire department has never had any trouble recruiting new firefighters. In fact, they've had to turn away volunteer applicants. Sure, the city of Aspen's stock of affordable housing has helped local residents stay in town, but there's another reason too. It's not easy to feel you're part of a community in a high-end resort like Aspen. Locals sometimes call it Fat City or Glitter Gulch. So maybe the new volunteers are looking for that elusive feeling of a real small-town community and finding it at the fire department. In 1998, 14 new recruits signed up, and 11 are still carrying their pagers.
And I'd made it through my acceptance into the department, and here we were at one of the first dinners of my tenure as a firefighter, and we went to this Chinese place. And I don't know the rules about eating and leaving food when you're with firefighters, and now I do, but I didn't. So we ordered, and we had beverages and things, and we had our meals, and in my meal, middle of my meal, I had the urge to use the restroom. So I excused myself from the table, like Mother taught me, and went to the restroom and came back and joined the table again. And as I was eating, the table was suspiciously quiet. And there was a lot of glancing and looking and real small chattering, and I couldn't quite figure it out, but I continued my dining. Before long, my mouth was on fire. On fire. It would seem as though some of the other firefighters, including Mr. Willard Clapper, who was across the table from me, had stuck those little red peppers into the green pea pods in my food. And I guess I'd eaten a few of them before they'd really taken effect. At that point, I was tearing, water was drooling from my mouth in such an extreme amount. All I could do was lean forward and pant at the table. And the guys felt bad. I think I earned my medal with that one. So that's my story right there. Getting juiced into the fire department.
A lot of fire departments throughout the state cannot staff their volunteer fire personnel now because of the time constraints.
Yeah.
And people just don't have the time and effort to put in to train the way we do. And I don't know where we get all our guys and gals, but they put in a huge amount of time and get it done.
Yeah.
And I think it's an attitude.
Camaraderie, and it's a big family. Everybody cares about everybody. If something happens to a family member, the department is there for you. They're there to just comfort you, to support you. We had one of the department members, he lost his house, and also one of the family. It was very devastating, but everybody got together for the support. That's what really counts around here. We're a very close group.
Today, the Aspen Volunteer Fire Department responds to structure fires, wildfires, structure collapse, and trench collapse. They perform auto extrication, aircraft extrication, swift water rescue, trench rescue, hazardous material cleanup, and over-the-edge rescue. They provide backup emergency medical service for Aspen Valley Hospital and mutual aid for other fire departments. They carry out fire safety inspections for all commercial buildings each year. They review new developments for emergency access. They inspect hydrants. They enforce life safety codes. They test alarms and pre-plan fire suppression strategies all over the district. And they investigate the cause of fires.
They're very conscientious people, and they're going, what's the fire service here like? And they'll say, well, it's an all-volunteer service. And they go, what? Volunteer? And then they do a little research and they find out our volunteer department is professional, is absolutely professional. We are highly trained, we are capable, we are experienced, and there is no professional department anywhere that can do anything better than we can do it.
I think the thing I take the most pride in is that a fire department, especially a volunteer fire department, is very much fundamentally about neighbors rushing to the aid of neighbors in time of need. And back when we joined the department, it was exactly that. Hazmat, EMS, swift water rescue, whatever we happen to be doing at any moment, it's still very much about neighbors rushing to the aid of neighbors. And I think that that's one of the things I take the most satisfaction out of working to preserve.
I think the town has changed an awful lot around the fire station, and I think it's affected the fire station. You know, there used to be a lot of small mom and pop, service-oriented and retail-oriented businesses around here that catered to people who lived here and worked here, and it wasn't quite as much of the high-end retail. Obviously, it wasn't the high-end retail. And you saw the same people on the streets every day when I was growing up, and you knew that that Bill Little was baking goods over here at Little Cliff's Bakery, and now it's definitely changed. You know, the storefronts change on a regular basis, and most of the stores I don't have any business being in unless it's with the fire department.
As this water backed up here because the snow melted too fast and the water couldn't get down the storm drains, so it all backed up and made a big lake in the street. And somebody had just come back from Lake Powell, and so they had their fishing rods in the car, and they went over to Tom's Market and got some fresh filleted trout, and they put them on the hooks, and they'd have it on the hook and leave it in the pond there in the middle of the street. And when a car would drive by or somebody walked by on the other side of the street, they go and pull this fish up out of the water. and the people who weren't from here would go, my God, how do they catch those fish in the middle? Well, you see, when the storm drains back up like that and the water comes right up out of the river, well, the fish just come with it. And they'd flop this fish up out of there. And
they actually believed it there.
Oh, they did. It was cute. Fishing at Lake Stogie.
Bill.
Little Cliff, Bill. He had a bunch of cherry pies, and we were throwing them at each other. By the time we got down, we had a police sergeant covered in them, Lisa Russell covered in them, broke the door, cracked the glass in City Hall, chasing people around, and we even stuffed policemen in trash cans. And didn't get shot.
You didn't get shot.
Yeah.
You got away with it.
Yeah, the very guy that shot Larkin, this guy Bill Stapleton and I put in the trash can.
Oh my goodness.
And he was going, help, help, police. And someone looked in the trash can and said, it is the police. So we go, well, we're the fire department. We'll save them.
I know that you saved a dog one time, and did you save the dog? I remember looking at a picture.
Yeah, it was on the west end of town, and we had one of the little Victorians was on fire, and somebody hollered that their dog was in there, so a couple of us went in, and I found the little pup and brought him out and turned the air pack off, and of course back then we didn't have just compressed air. We was running pure oxygen in our tanks because we had oxygen bottles hooked up, I guess you might say, in tandem on the walls, and that's where we got our breathing apparatus after we finally got some SCBAs. So I just took that off, and poor little guy, and I just stuck that down there and then turned the valve on and give him a little oxygen, and we got him all cranked up and going.
Oh, that's great.
Back in the snorkel truck into the big boom truck.
Yeah, the snorkel truck.
Okay, the snorkel truck is the longest, biggest truck we have with this big bucket hanging off the back end and with a snorkel on it. And so I'm backing it in, gun, things going beep, 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 going back. And we had some lines painted on the floor so you could only go back so far. And, you know, Sternman's backing me up and he's going like this, come on back, come on back, come on back. And I'm going, looking at the lines, and all of a sudden, the bucket of the snorkel truck goes through the windshield of the truck behind it. You know? So that was.
He's like, whoa! He's looking at the beaver tail, and the bucket has already gone past his head. He's looking at the back of the truck. I think, good.
That's good.